say this. This is not investing advice. It's more thinking about scenarios. Scenarios that could matter to how we spend and save, as well as what might happen to the economy and the job market. But it's definitely not investing advice. Take it from Reggie.
I don't know anything about investing, but I like to think I know things about stuff.
Don't undersell yourself. She definitely knows about stuff. So, let's get to the forecast. Up first, the TSX. It's trading around an all-time high, up more than 80% since it plunged at the start of the pandemic. The index is now more than 21,000 points. How optimistic is our party crew of forecasters that this run will keep going?
I'm gonna say it's gonna go down to 19.5. Partially because of what you said, that it's at a record high. And, you know, that's the way life goes is when some things are high, they're gonna go down.
Carl, a market strategist, pretty much agrees with Reggie.
I think I'd look at a 20,500 number. So slightly lower than where we are today. Yes.
And why?
I do think that we had an enormous run up, and it's a situation in which we have a lot of good news priced in, not a lot of negatives. And the reality is that, you know, we do have permanent scarring that has happened in the Canadian economy, the global economies, that will harm us in the years ahead. We're going to need to heal that before we can move forward.
So Reggie and Carl pretty much agree. What goes up must come down. Lindsay, though, sees things playing out differently.
So my forecast or prediction would be around 2,300 or 22,000 rather. In my world, I talk about a trend kind of called revenge spending. I think we've seen, you know, disproportionately high savings rates throughout the pandemic, and I think some of that's materialized to spend, but I think a lot more of that will come through 2021 and into 2022.
So Lindsay thinks businesses will take off as the economy reopens. And that is part of why the TSX is rallying right now. But there's good news. Banks and oil make up a big part of the Canadian market. Right now, they're both rolling. That's for oil specifically. Big consequences.
If oil goes up, inflation expectations go up. If oil goes down, inflation expectations go down. We've seen a doubling in global oil prices, and that has lifted inflation forecasts and freaked out central bankers, freaked out many people on Main Street, and had really wide implications.
Among those implications, the Bank of Canada is expecting to raise interest rates in the spring to help keep inflation in check. How many more rate hikes we get and how quickly they come will, at least in part, come back to oil. That's why Carl thinks the price of oil is the most important number facing the global economy. Right now, for the economy, inflation is pretty much the main event. And this brings us to Bitcoin. A year ago, Bitcoin was trading at about 15,000. Now, it's around 65,000. forecasts, email us, costofliving@cdc.ca, or vote in our Twitter polls. They're up now. We're at CDC Cost of Living. Until then, last word to Rich.
I can't wait to see how right or wrong I was.
We all have questions, and sometimes you've got nobody to ask. Till now. That is, if they're about business or the economy. Like, why are eyeglasses so expensive? We can answer that. Where have all the cowboys gone? No idea. Call with your economics questions. 1-866-550-COST. That's 1-866-550-2678. Operators are standing by to take on your business mysteries. On your Radio Live podcast, this is The Cost of Living. I'm Paul Everett. Picture this. You're home, dishes are done, you're settling into the couch with a snack, book lunch, out of Survivor, and you hear this. It's a text from your boss telling you to reply to a client email, like right now, at 9 p.m. Oh, could a demand like that become a thing of the past? If you live in Ontario, maybe. The province introduced legislation that lets employees ignore work-related emails, texts, and calls after hours. It's called the right to disconnect. It's one of a number of ideas now out there that are re-examining how we work. So, will establishing these kinds of boundaries improve work-life balance? Or is there a different way to go? Our producer Danielle Nerman looked at another idea. What if there were no boundaries at all? So Danielle, before we get to no boundaries, let's talk about this right to disconnect.
Right, so it's legislation that makes sure workers get a break after the day is over. In Ontario, the new rules mean that companies with 25 or more employees will have to develop policies that allow staff to unclog when they're off the clock.
So laws like this aren't new. They have existed in other places for years, like France, the Philippines, Spain, Italy. We just saw Portugal bring in its own bill.
Yeah, they're calling it the right to rest. So it's not a new idea, but what Ontario is doing is a first for Canada.
And not really a coincidence that it's happening now during a pandemic when people are doing a lot of thinking and rethinking about how they work. And of course, with people working from home, the lines between work hours and off hours might blurry.
Oh yeah, we've heard it so many times. Canadians saying, working longer hours now than before the pandemic. They're getting burnt out. There's been lots of polls and studies about that. The right to disconnect is meant to address that problem. People need their me time.
I can use it.
You do. But here's the thing. There are those who believe that the right to disconnect is the wrong solution to a modern problem. That it's actually going to make things harder.
Don't tell me not to email after 5 o'clock. That makes me more stressed out.
That's Jody Thompson. She thinks rather than the right to disconnect, workers should have the right to connect whenever they want.
Just let me do what I need to do. And you know what? If I feel like petting my cat at 10 o'clock in the morning and taking a break then, or taking my dog for a walk in the afternoon, or taking a little nap between 9 and 5, who cares? As long as I'm getting my job done.
So who's Jody Thompson? And you had to detect just a hint of a Midwest Americana accent there.
Yeah, she's from Minnesota. She's an HR specialist, and back in the 2000s, she was working for Best Buy. She worked Monday to Friday, 8 to 5, and Jody told me she felt enormous pressure to stay in the office until 5, even when she didn't have any work left to do. She would not leave a minute earlier.
Feels like things changed for her.
Yeah, she went out on her own, started her own business where she helps companies implement the results-only workplace environment, or ROE. It's a workplace strategy where employees have complete control over when and where they work.
If I'm clear with somebody about what their measurable results need to be, whether they're in an office or on the moon, it doesn't matter.
So it's based on two principles: autonomy, you're self-directed, and accountability. You know what work you have to get done, and you get it done.
How much different is this from what we're seeing with flexible work days, like what's really come up during the pandemic? People going in the office for 2 days, staying home for, say, 3.
So with that, you would be negotiating when you're at home and when you're at the office with your boss. So your time is still managed by someone else, but not with this.
The manager is managing work, not me. I don't have to ask permission to go to the dentist. I don't have to say, oh, I'm coming in at 9 this morning instead of 8. Is it okay if I go to my child's play? All of that crap disappears. It is gone. And when you do that, it's amazing what teams do together. They don't just stop working. They don't go on vacation for a year and never check in because they know they're being held accountable to results. And so they do what they need to do to get their job done and do what they need to do to get everything else in their life done.
So the freedom of all this sounds appealing, autonomy, but could an employer exploit the system, set results that would amount to a 60 or 80-hour work week?
Maybe. I mean, the devil's in the details.
And then the workplace may go with this. Take the traditional clock that we know, smash it on the ground. This is something that we're not used to. This is pretty out there.
Yeah, the 40-hour work week is deeply entrenched in our culture. 8 hours labor, 8 hours recreation, and 8 hours rest. That slogan was coined more than 200 years ago.
Yeah, that's actually when the labor movement started. You saw workers at that time fighting for shorter work days, and that's pretty much how we arrived at the 40-hour work week we now know.
Yeah, and 200 years later, we're still expecting people to be in the office 8 hours a day.
When people are in the office, it looks like work. I go to meetings, I go around the water cooler, I'm, talking to people in the hallway. So now I feel like, oh yeah, that looks like work. Work is happening. But when I can't see you, you might be doing your laundry. That doesn't look like work. Walking your dog doesn't look like work. So now I'm uncomfortable. So now I have to figure out, how can I manage you? I'm going to get, spy software and all sorts of things so I can make sure you're working. Even though you probably weren't working when you were in the office. You're just in the office doing time.
So she wants to get rid of being at work just for the sake of being seen to be working. What's called FaceTime. What about employers? Are they going for this?
Well, it's been adopted by about 100 companies. And surprisingly, not just white-collar industries.
Really?
Yeah, even manufacturing jobs. She goes as far as to say it could work at a grocery store, where you'd have cashiers choosing their own hours and trading shifts among each other without asking for permission.
I would like to see how that works practically across a lot of different industries. As for Jody, since she's from Minnesota, is this just a U.S. thing, or are Canadian companies doing this as well?
They are. Her clients are ATV Financial. They make labels, which makes custom labels for kids' clothes. They don't lose their mittens at daycare. And the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. That's one of her biggest clients. And Jody says more are lining up.
So over the past year, there's been a lot of interest in the results-only work environment, but we're getting the most interest from Canadian companies. And it seems like Canada is the most open to this kind of progressive idea.
So how would she say this stacks up to something like the right to disconnect that they're introducing in Ontario?
Well, obviously, she thinks her idea is better. I want to be clear that Jody thinks everyone has the right to disconnect, but they should do it when they want.
I do have to say, taking a little nap after a big lunch, something like that, sounds nice.
Yeah, if you get your work done. If I lie down after a shawarma, I'm done. I'm never getting up.
Use a shawarma right now. Thanks, Danielle. So, would you like to smash the traditional workplace clock, have full control over when and where you work? Would it work for your job? Call us and let us know. Our talkback line is 1-866-550-COST. That's 1-866-550-COST. Or send an email to costofliving@cdc.ca. cold. In a world of streaming music, that is bucking the trend.
Health crisis.
Hello, my name is Shirley Harper, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Alberta, and I'm also a Canada Research Chair in Climate Change and Health.
And Shirley Harper traveled to the UN climate talks to make that case. She's the lead author on a new report looking at how tackling climate change can also improve health and health equity in the Americas. And she was in Glasgow to present it.
Yeah, and this was a case of converging crises, right? Because we had this huge heat wave that swept over the nation, but also we were dealing with COVID at the same time. So usual public health measures like opening cooling stations, passing out water, encouraging people to contact their neighbors, that was a lot more challenging in this situation because you also had to cope with infection control, making sure people were distancing and making sure that people were checking in on their neighbors safely. You know, COVID is here and hopefully it will be over soon, but the climate crisis will not be over, and we're going to continue to experience these extreme heat events going into the future. And there's been recent studies actually that have shown that if we don't limit warming to 1.5 degrees, then we can expect extreme heat waves like that at least every 5 years.
And of course in Vancouver, emergency health services were overrun. They weren't capable of dealing with it either.
This past summer was incredibly hard for the public health response in terms of the heat wave, and I think that this is a sign of what's to come for climate change. We know that we're going to expect these types of heat waves. We know that climate change has already increased the intensity and frequency of heat wave events. And what we experienced last summer just shows the extent to which the intensity of heat waves could increase, and it shows that we're not
policy position in Yellowknife, and I'm here as a board member of the Global Climate and Health Alliance and part of the WHO Working Group on Climate Change and Health.
The doctor is in, as in Glasgow, lobbying politicians and policymakers to pay attention to just what the climate is doing to our health. Much like Shirley Harper, Courtney Howard knows what she's seeing, and she saw it in BC's Okanagan region this summer.
The town where I was staying didn't even have air quality information available for 2 weeks, you know? We know that smoke increases asthma, it increases chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and it is increasingly being felt to increase overall mortality. So every general practitioner needs to know which of their patient populations are vulnerable, needs to make sure that their asthma medications are refilled ahead of time, needs to know when the clean air shelter is in their communities, needs to know what the evacuation routes are. None of that am I seeing rolled out at the scale that needs to happen. And to me, that moves beyond neglecting this issue on an advocacy front. And it starts to land in a place where we're simply not fulfilling our critical duty to society and to our patients.
Howard is no rookie when it comes to considering the crucial link between health and a warming planet. She's been urging Canada to tackle the challenges for a long time.
It was in 2009 when The Lancet, one of the world's most prestigious medical journals, said that climate change is the biggest health threat of the 21st century. To this day, a very small proportion of universities in Canada and around the world are even teaching new doctors about the threats of climate change and what to do about it. So if we're not briefing people, they're not going to be bringing that topic up at all the tables they sit at. They're not going to be thinking through it in their head. So to me, it was absolutely no surprise that we were underprepared for the heat dome.
Howard not only wants to see governments go after the big emitters like fossil fuel companies, she also wants to see the medical profession clean and green as well. From building better hospitals to prescribing medicines that do less harm to the environment.
So how about we change the way we live, clean up our skies, and save some lives right now, and decrease the amount of money that we're spending in our healthcare systems? So this is a moment of transition. You know, we've lived a very difficult couple of years, and I think the best thing we can do now is to just continue the path of change we're already on and get ourselves to a low carbon place that will actually be the thing to keep us safe and healthy.
And in Glasgow, here she is in action, publicly challenging Canada's Minister of Climate Change, Stephen Guilbeault, to sign on to a global pledge to develop a national net zero healthcare system.
And I was talking to the leader of this initiative last night, and he said that 40 countries have now signed on, and Canada is teetering on the brink. So I would just like to very much encourage you. We know that...
Days later, the signatories to the deal were unveiled. Canada wasn't on the list. Within hours, though, Howard got what she wanted. Guilbeault announced Canada is in. Now, the solution to curbing the many health crises of climate change is limiting the amount the world continues to warm. But getting to that goal of 1.5 degrees takes a lot of action. And while Canada may have fallen in line with the pledge to get healthcare to net zero, the country leading the charge is the United Kingdom. Nick Watts is the Chief Sustainability Officer with the National Health Service in England. We reached him in Glasgow.
Hi, hello, thank you so much for having me.
Okay, that title, Chief Sustainability Officer, that sounds pretty bureaucratic. What is it that you do?
Bureaucratic, come on. It's a new job. It was created 12 months ago. The NHS is one of the largest employers in the world. 1.4 million staff. We provide healthcare across the entire country. We do so in a way that makes everyone incredibly proud. But we are also part of the problem that we're here to talk about today, climate change. My job is to make sure that the NHS responds to climate change, that we adapt to the health impacts of climate change, that we reduce the emissions that come from healthcare itself.
And since you started in the role, how much movement have you actually seen towards slashing emissions in the healthcare system in the UK?
Over the last 10 years, the NHS has reduced its emissions by roughly 30%, well ahead of the UK. We're really proud of that. What we're even more proud of is 12 months ago when I started, we said we were going to be the world's first healthcare system to get to net zero emissions. Net zero is the emissions we control directly by 2040. Net zero for our entire global carbon footprint by 2045. It's been 12 months since we made that commitment, and we're a little bit proud to be able to say that we were targeting an emissions reduction of 1,260 kilotons of 1,260 something of carbon. Very roughly the equivalent of 1.7 million flights from London to New York, or powering 1.1 million homes.